Hello.
Tomar unos minuticos para hablar por aquí con las personas que estén presentes.
Hello, Marcel. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So we're already live here.
We are already live at the University of Mary Washington.
Welcome.
Program.
I'm just waiting for Jeremy.
So I'm trying to get ready here.
Okay.
For those who are, Marcel, we're doing an experiment here with my support group, and while we're doing this by Zoom, we're using Clubhouse to connect to other people.
Ah, very good.
So everything I'm saying here will be broadcasted, so to speak.
Okay, great.
Through Clubhouse, and maybe generate another conversation in another place where we're having our conversation here.
Of course, yeah, wonderful. Yeah, that sounds good. Do you want to show anything? No, we don't do.
No, I think we're gonna talk,
Yeah.
answer questions from folks.
Okay.
I see Jeremy is joining, and for those who are joining in Clubhouse, we're getting the University of Mary Washington professors, both from the literature and political science departments, line up with us here.
Okay, good. Here's Jeremy. Wonderful.
¿Cómo estamos?
¿Cómo estás, Jeremy?
Aquí nomás realmente es un gustazo, ¿no? Que usted esté haciendo eso hoy día para nosotros y ojalá que haya gente, ¿no? Que se asomen, ¿no?
Lo importante es intentarlo siempre.
Es intentarlo, así es. No
Generate the space for these conversations.
That's it. And it's an important conversation. It's a very interesting book, and we've been promoting it among our students and faculty, with also the promise that they may get a copy if they like one. So,
yeah.
So we,
and you will at the department have on the next couple of days sent by CDDA IQ Latino, the nonprofit I founded. They're going to send copies of the book so that every student who wants to get a copy will get it for free. The idea with university students is to provide the instrument to generate the conversations that we promote through the paradoxes that we talk about in the book.
Wonderful.
Hey.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
So I think it's time to start. Well, we have 1 minute, but my name is Marcel Rotter. I'm the department chair of modern languages and literatures. I am not a Spanish professor, so I'm just sitting on the sidelines here and do the tech things. Just a short announcement. Please use the Q&A function for questions. You can also upvote them if you find that somebody else has also the same question. Please reserve the chat box only for technical problems that you might have. Okay, I'm happy to help behind the lines here, behind the scene, and I'm going dark now, and I hand it over to Professor Jeremy La Rochelle, who is one of our Spanish professors and will take over.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, so glad everyone could make it. Buenas tardes. Great to be here with you all, at least virtually. So it's kind of where we are these days. So it's a great pleasure and it's a great honor to welcome Leopoldo Martinez Nucete to Zoom here as a part of a Mary Washington event. He's a Venezuelan American lawyer. He's an expert of global trends, and also a really interesting fact, he's a former congressman of the Asamblea Nacional de Venezuela, the National Assembly of Venezuela. And so he had some interesting experiences there that we possibly could hear about today as well. He also founded the Center for Democracy and Development in the Americas, and he serves as the executive editor of IQ Latino. And so really, really interesting organizations that work to help with Latino empowerment in the US. He's a member of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, and he's also founding chair of the Latino Victory Project, right? So a really interesting organization that I'd like to hear a little bit more about today as well. So he's a writer for various media outlets in Latin America, in the US, and in Spain. So in his provocative book that we've distributed, that's been available on our website in an abbreviated form, I'm saying in Spanish, 94 paradoxes to consider in the 21st century. He describes today's contradictions with regards to climate change, civil rights, diversity, social media, and the role of kind of propagating misinformation and lack of information literacy and polarization of society, among other issues, among other paradoxical issues that are going on right now as we're entering 2021. So without further ado, I wish to welcome Leopoldo Martinez Nucete, and he's going to give a talk here for us today based on the book and anything else that he wants to share with us. And then at the end, we'll open up the floor here for comments and discussion. And I hope that both students and faculty can jump in and join that discussion. So if you have questions, as Dr. Rother said, use the Q&A function, and then we'll be able to communicate them. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias. Y Leopoldo Martinez Nucete.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much, Professor Jeremy and Professor Marcel. You're both very kind and generous in opening this space for me today as part of the larger community of the University of Mary Washington, to which I am deeply connected in different ways. I want to use the time to talk about the book, like you said, and what people can find in it, but also provoke a conversation among us, not only about the subjects, but about any other issue that may be of interest, given my own experiences, as you mentioned. I've been strongly connected to Latino empowerment projects in the United States, to the fight for democracy in Venezuela, and I'm also an advocate for human rights in Latin America, and particularly in Venezuela. So with all of that, I think, which in a way you find in a book, topics that relate to those issues, whatever other subjects, questions, or matter of interest that people might have, I will be happy to address. Let me start telling you the story about the book and what you find in it. This book it's a collection of essays. So it's not an original publication. It's essays I published throughout a period of 2 years, pretty much, for a group of outlets that syndicated my column. I write frequently, and I've been doing that for years, for El Nacional and for other media outlets in Latin America. And at some point in time, in our strategies with the editors and the people that work with me, we thought, after a couple of articles I wrote about trends I saw in the economy and in Latin America, an increase of readership in the subject. And then I wrote another one, and a series of 4 articles became an invitation to, Leo, why don't you explore, let's say 20, 25 subjects that you think are provocative and that convoke a conversation about the trends affecting us these days. I couldn't stop writing when I started the mission, and it went from 20 to 40, and it kept going because I write weekly, this column, and it ended up being 2 years of columns, and it was 104 essays at the beginning. But once the editors thought this could be a book, they started working on the proofreading and the packaging of the book, and they found that a few columns could merge with others in order to organize them in different subject matters and come with a book that ended up having 194 paradoxes to consider in the 21st century. And the first thing I say when I speak about the book, which is this is the design of both the English and the Spanish version, which was previous to the English version. People often ask me, why 94? And I say, well, there's no scientific reason of why 94. It was 104 essays that, when edited, ended up being 94, organized in chapters, which you, when go through the book, you'll see go through the turbulent and changing times we're going through, the economy, the state of our economy and the trends impacting our lives, the new parameters affecting our day-to-day life, the reinvention of violence in current society, Venezuela and Latin America, and I had to underscore Venezuela because it's a cause that is in my heart, and the planet at risk, which is one of my most important advocacies around how to reconcile economic growth and opportunities with protecting our environment and sustainability as a fundamental propositions this day. So when you get your hands on this book, think about how we got there. It's a collection of essays, so you can jump from essays to others without having a continuous reading from page 1 to page 300. You know, you can jump around the subjects, and one subject will eventually trigger curiosity to go to another. So there are many ways to read the book. I have friends who said, I enjoy the book because I read a few things, put it on my nightstand, and then a few days I come back and I'm listening to the news. I say, maybe Leo wrote something about this, and they find something and they connect. The other thing you will find in this book is part of the paradox itself in which we live. The multilateral organizations around the world, the World Bank, the IMF, the Inter-American Development Bank, the United Nations and all its branches, and many other think tanks and organizations have done research about all these issues for more than 40, 50 years sometimes, warning us about things that were happening, telling us about policies we had to implement, creating awareness both in the collective and in the political class about the urgency of some of these issues, the environment being one. And the most paradoxical thing is that our governments, in a way, and our societies were investing millions and millions of dollars in getting all that research translated into white papers, policy papers, publications, reports, in all these areas that I go around in the book. Yet, those books and papers ended up in drawers. And nobody paid attention to many of the things that were warned by many of the best experts and minds around the world. So one of the things I do in the book while writing the essays is try to borrow from that research, from that amazing collection of data that is out there, to provide facts to people when they approach these conversations and these discussions. So the book is a framework of subjects, of facts, and of issues that we need to address. Now, that is, together with the paradox I mentioned, we spent millions of hours and dollars and talent and energy to look into these issues, and we never paid attention. That's a very big paradox of our time, but our times are paradoxical in itself. So when we titled the book, we wanted to say, this is not just about trends, it's that the trends we're living in implicate a paradox. And think about what happened over the last 2, 3, or 4 decades. We were looking, democracy making progress in different places in the world. Let's go back to the days in which Francis Fukuyama proclaimed the end of history. He said, okay, this is over. There is a triumph of democracy and Western values. There is a triumph of capitalism after the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and everybody was thinking, okay, times of progress. And we had a lot of progress. We made a lot of progress in many fronts, scientifically, economically, politically, socially. But there were undercurrents cultivated by the same progress we were making. And those undercurrents were somehow seen by experts who warned, listen, we can jeopardize the progress we're making in all these fronts if we don't pay attention to the consequences that are building up a resistance, a reaction a problematic situation that at some point may explode in a way or in another. So that is why it is so paradoxical what happened, because we never thought in the midst of all this progress, let's talk about or begin with social media and democracy. When social media emerged, we thought, all of us thought, wow, this is magnificent. Society will be well informed. The public forum will expand. People will be able to participate. People will be, governments will find ways to communicate in many ways. We will find many tools to empower society in the democratic process and bring about a better system of government through information, through participation, through the exchange that this magnificent world of the internet and social media is providing. Yet, where we're situated right now is in the paradox that although many of those things were achieved and they are true, we have a society that is less democratic, less tolerant, less aware of the facts. There's more misinformation today or disinformation today than ever, and more polarized all over the world, because social media kind of leverage on the undercurrents that were happening and allow people to express their opinions without regard to facts. And one of the things that has happened is that social media has had two impacts. On the one hand, it has equalized opinions and facts. And as you know, we're all entitled to our opinion, as Senator Monahan used to say, but you're not entitled to your own facts. You can argue about the benefits of the rain or whether you need a rainy day or not, but you cannot argue it's raining if it is raining. And this is where we are. And you may like the rain or you may dislike the rain. That's your opinion. But please don't tell me it's not raining if I look through the window and there's water falling from the sky. And we have this challenge to facts mixed with opinions in the world of social media that has created this kind of architecture of misinformation that is used by those who know are misinforming people. There are those who are just misinformed, peddling the misinformation, and there are those who are taking advantage of that, scanning what's happening and creating strategies, political strategies, to achieve power based on misinformation. I'm not going to name anyone. I'm not going to say anything specific, but everybody listening to us can relate to how that has impacted America, a beacon of democracy. But it has happened in Europe. It has happened in other places. Think about the parallels of what's happening in different democracies around the world, how polarized we are, how difficult it is to find common ground, even in the face of the pandemic. There are leaders around the world who said it's not true that we have a virus, or somebody's to be blamed for the virus, instead of focusing in what do we do scientifically to handle this crisis in the best way possible for the common good, for the collective, for society. So that happens when all this is taking place. But you might say, well, but social media is not the only way people can get informed of them and on hold of information and opinions. They can go to the traditional media. Yes, but be mindful that it is through our telephones that we consume these days most of the information we get. And the notifications respond to what I and many have defined in our articles as the world of algorithm, or la mentira deseada, the desired falsehood, or the post-truth era. We're living in a world where we want, and our algorithm defines that we, through the notifications we get in our phone, we get exposed to the information that reinforces our beliefs, our opinions. And that creates bubbles. And those bubbles become separated, intolerant of each other. In social media, we are witnessing one of the new forms of violence we're witnessing these days, social media lynching. Reputations are assassinated through social media by different operatives in every day. So this is also creating a pressing problem for traditional media outlets. When you go through a traditional media outlet, whether it's a newspaper or a television station, broadcasting openly or cable, you can imagine there is an editorial board. You can imagine there are people fact-checking. All of that was true. I wrote articles for the past 25 years of my life, and I was subject to fact-checking every time I said something in my articles. Now, these days, traditional media knows that they compete with social media. Moreover, they get to us, not only through the TV or through us going and buying a piece of newspaper or a magazine or jumping in their link to read their content. No, they get on hold of us through notifications that compete with the people we follow in Twitter, with the people we follow in Facebook, with that bubble we live in. So they need to pierce that bubble. They need to get into your bubble. And in order to get into your bubble, they need to be competitive. They need to be eccentric. They need to be, in a way, fighting the same fight that we are seeing in that world. And that has produced a very dangerous climate for our democracy. If these days have not shown how dangerous and delicate it is. I mean, let's think about the proposition of electoral fraud. I was in a conversation recently with somebody who was saying what he wanted to end the discussion saying, well, it's my opinion that there was a fraud in the election. And I said, sorry, fraud is not a matter of opinion. Fraud is a matter of fact. And you, in order to say fraud, you need to show the facts, and there are no facts indicating that. So you can't have an opinion that there was fraud if you don't have factual evidence. You might have the opinion that one system of voting may be or could facilitate fraud. But if the facts show it's not true, it's not true. There's no discussion about it. But yet we are in the middle of that difficulty of finding ourselves. So democracy is suffering. But think about this, which is very important. While this is happening between us as individuals in the world of social media, foreign actors are operating in this space. The new hypothesis of conflict in the world is not conventional, is not militarily conceived as we used to think about conflict. It's cybersecurity and cyber communications. There are countries who have mastered in these two fronts. They can hack our very systems of utilities, our very State Department, our very confidential information in the Treasury or in the banks, and use that to our detriment. They can do many things in the cybersecurity front without even mobilizing one military resource these days. Now, on the other hand, they can influence public opinion through misinformation, and they're doing so. Brexit, the Catalonian referendum in Spain, the 2016 election, and you keep going and going and going. And mastering this, at the very helm of who is mastering this, you got Russia. So there we go on a paradoxical thing in front of us. When we thought that the Cold War was over, the Soviet Union is extinct, democracy and capitalism are there to stay, the end of history of Fukuyama. Here we are in democracies that are polarized, conflicted around the world, not only because infighting among them, but also because foreign actors are capable and culpable of inciting that inner fighting. Because the only way you can win a fight against a society or a country that is stronger than you is weakening that country from within. And there I leave you with that paradox, and I move to another one. We made tremendous progress over the past few years on our economies. Yes, we did, technological and otherwise. Yet, people were warning us of two things. Yes, as we make progress and technology comes in and takes the primary, significant, relevant role that we are witnessing, we have to be mindful that technology will replace labor in many forms, not only manufacturing labor, even the legal profession. Every profession is impacted by applications, technological applications these days. So if you look at today, not only in a factory through robotics and informatics, or in a accounting department in a bank, you will see that payrolls are 1/4 or less of what they were 20 years ago. That means, in spite of the progress, less jobs are created. We had a notion, if there is economic growth, if there is expansion, there will be more jobs. Guess what? The paradox is that the type of economy that is shaping is not offering new jobs in the places that are driving that growth based on the innovations we are introducing in our economy. Therefore, we need to find the jobs that are emerging in the new economy. And to get to those jobs, you need to do a massive workforce development effort in society. People were warning us about it. Experts were saying it, yet we did not listen. The same happened with the environment. I mean, I was a fifth grader in Venezuela back in the day, when every teacher will tell you it's a non-renewable energy source. We were an oil country, and the proposition in Venezuela was we're very rich in oil, but we have to be mindful. Oil has its days counted. At some point in time, we won't have more oil, because every time we consume that oil, we basically deplete the resources. So if we knew that, and we were growing and growing and growing, we were not only impacting our environment with our patterns of consumption and growth, we were also banking on the same source of energy, oil. So it took a fifth grader to understand that you had to do something to transition our economy from where it is today to renewable sources of energy that will slowly take the space that today oil still has and provide us with two side important consequences or effects. Sustainability of our environment, because emissions will lower, and two, transitioning to another source of energy that could sustain growth itself, because without energy, we cannot grow. So that is factual, that is simple. See how difficult it is to get our society to agree into those transitions. So progress in the economic front had that paradox, which was sustainability, fiscal sustainability, environmental sustainability, social sustainability. And those are the things that are exploding among us. And that's why, and this brings me to another paradox I want to touch, because it correlates to this, it's immigration. Why are we seeing that many countries are experiencing this debate that demonizes immigration? Because the impacts we are seeing, the progress we had, took jobs away from some people. And immigrants did not take those jobs from the people. Robotics, competition, new trends took those jobs away. Immigrants got jobs or are working in sectors of the economy where there was abundant demand for their work. Now, immigrants in our history and in the history of the world have shown to be a positive contribution to society. In the United States, without immigration, we would not be the country we are. In the United States, without immigration over the past few years, particularly Latino immigration, we would have more than 25 states aging their population to extremes that would pose difficulty in sustaining economic growth like we see in other European countries. Because aging of the economy, aging of the population is a problem. And Latino immigration and other forms of other immigrants brought fresh currents of people into our system that renovated the possibilities in many states in our country. Latinos, undocumented immigrants are less proclived to commit crimes, according to FBI and Department of Justice statistics, against property or against other individuals. They pay nothing less than $23 billion in taxes, $9 billion in payroll taxes, and $12 billion in state taxes across the country. Yet, they are demonized, and people who lost their job think that they are a threat to them when it's quite the contrary. There is a paradox we have to deal with. Progress in cities, the same. We made tremendous progress in the inner cities, but gentrification created new problems, new big social problems that we have to address. Civil rights movement, equal marriage equality, and all the inclusion of the different diverse communities that for the good integrate our society this day, create reactions in people that are very conservative, very reactionary, religiously concerned, and they have come together and mobilized against that progress. So progress had the paradoxical effect of pushback from different angles of our society. Latin America, we thought in the United States, Latin America was there for granted as a partner for us, that things were going well. Yet, not only there are turbulent times going through in Latin America, still in Cuba, in Nicaragua, much more in Venezuela or Central America, the Caribbean remains weak. But guess what? The biggest growing partners in Latin America are not the US or US companies, are China and Russia. Those are the ones that are really getting involved in different aspects of economic enterprise and endeavors, and political also, in the case of Russia, political entanglement with many governments in the region. So the United States, instead of having more influence, it has less influence in the future of a natural partner to us, which is Latin America. So those are the kind of paradoxes I walk through the book, and I invite you to go through it. And because it's time to listen from all of you, what I want you in closing to think about is that this book is not a prescription of anything. It's just an invitation to think, and an invitation to all of you to use the book as a framework of reference to generate conversations. One of the big problems we have these days in our society is that we're not conversant about the problems impacting us. We're not listening to the others. We're not listening to each other. And my proposition is that the book is just an opportunity, a tool among many, for you to think and to generate those spaces of conversation in the hallways of a university, in the reading clubs, in whatever other environments you think, like this, digital environments, you see fit, with or without the author. It's just about the issues there to generate those conversations. So that's the book, and that's what I propose.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is fascinating talk. A lot of themes coming out. I see a number of questions coming up in the Q&A. So I guess depending on how we want to go about it, should I read some questions?
I think you should, yeah.
Let's do that. So
a group of them, or one after the other.
Let's do that, and then feel free, audience members. We have a nice good attendance today. So feel free to add more here to the Q&A, and we can try to get to as many as we can. So I'll start with the first one. How do we protect ourselves against these kind of propaganda misinformation campaigns when algorithms are targeted to individual people? Even pop-up ads influence our decisions subconsciously. So that's Alex Polymeropoulos, no? So you want to start there?
Well, that's a big question, because, you know, there is a line, you know, there's the freedom of speech issue here as well. And I'm not proposing by any means that we engage in restricting speech. I'm just proposing that social media outlets exercise a discretion in preventing the propagation and the peddling of misinformation in the social media space that they cultivate. And one thing they could start doing is not only signaling to people when, and they have started doing that at Twitter, you know, there are facts contending what is being said here, particularly to those people who have a greater audience in the social media. We saw that with former President Trump, and how that ended in his account suspension. But I think social media must do every due diligence necessary to prevent bots coming into the space of social media. There are hundreds of thousands of accounts around influencers, around strategists, around communication firms that are peddling misinformation, that are amplifying this problem in social media, and that needs to be purged. One thing is Jeremy La Rochelle participating with Leopoldo Martinez and clashing over their opinions and their vision of things. Another thing is 100,000 people who do not exist peddling misinformation to get Jeremy and Leopoldo to fight over an issue that they just feel passionate about. And that's the problem there. There is a mission for the big tech companies here. There is a reflection that we have to make policy-wise. How do we incentivize a better environment? And there is, of course, each of us as individuals. I will propose that all of us follow more people that think differently than us in our social media. I will propose that we try to generate spaces to be conversant with them in a respectful manner. It's going to be difficult. You're going to get insulted by many people. And I think that one important role that think tanks, universities could play, because they particularly universities and everything around universities, continue to have a great respect in our society, is generate fact-finding, fact-checking around the most salient, significant, relevant subjects out there in trending in social media. You know, I think we need to. There is a lot of information about the facts, but there is very poor use of the tools to inform people of the facts. I mean, we have not been as efficient as the malicious actors of misinformation have been in leveraging with social media to peddle their disinformation. We have not been clever enough to use the tools offered by social media to put the facts in front of people, to get the facts through the currents of public opinion that form themselves in social media. So it's a big collective effort. I don't think anybody has a magic wand to resolve it. It's one of those issues that's going to take years for us to get it right, but we need to start at some point getting it right.
Wonderful. We'll continue the next question. This is great. So we have Gabriel Yosik is writing, generally speaking, how would you characterize politics in Venezuela from a Venezuelan perspective? Do you think America has done a good job or bad job in reporting Venezuelan affairs? Gracias por su tiempo.
Well, you know, Venezuela has been one of those issues that I would say had been most controversial in the way that it has been observed and treated throughout the conflict that has taken place in the country over the past 20 years. There was no doubt in my mind from the very beginning, and I suffered the consequences, and I became an exile after being a congressman in Venezuela, that the trend in Venezuela was of what we define as neo-authoritarian rule systems. The neo-authoritarian systems use democracy against democracy and end up becoming a very dictatorial system. But it's a different kind of dictatorship, the one you see in Venezuela, because the dictators this day are careful enough in presenting themselves in a way that they look or that they appear democratic, and that dissent appears part of a rebellion or a conspiracy against what they say is the empowerment of those who did not have a voice. For many years, Chavez claimed to be a person giving voice to the poor in Venezuela. In a way, Chavez was supposed to advocate for those people. It ended up being quite the contrary for Venezuela. Venezuela is today one of the poorest nations in Latin America, in spite of being one of the most resourceful nations in Latin America. If you look at the potential Venezuela has, not only it's an oil abundant country, there is every single mineral and every single potential wherever you look in Venezuela. There's the Caribbean to develop tourism. There is incredible fertile land to be working with. There is all sorts of resources, and Venezuela did develop for years a very strong system, an inclusive system that created a very talented, a very resourceful middle class. So the country was very well positioned to succeed. Yet how did Chavez emerge into power? Well, pretty much like every populist. He saw the growing inequalities in Venezuela and leveraged on those. And when I saw what happened in the United States after 2016, when I started my own opposition against former President Trump, I said, well, this is exactly the same playbook that Chavez used. You find some sort of discontent and growing inequality, and instead of addressing the causes of that, you exploit that trauma, that sentiment from one of the extremes. Chavez did it from the extreme left, Trump did it from the extreme nationalistic right, but the means they used and the purpose was to concentrate power for their own parties, for their own for their own leaders and for themselves. So what happened in Venezuela is extremely sad. The country now, for you all to know, the country has created a situation. The regime has created a situation where we have more than 5 million Venezuelans around the world. It's one of the biggest refugee crises that we have seen for years in the Western Hemisphere, for sure, around the world these days. The number of Venezuelan refugees around the world is the same or about the same coming out of Syria. I'm not saying that the conditions in Venezuela are the same that we see in Syria. They're very different conflicts, and we cannot draw any parallels between what the Syrian population goes through and what the Venezuelan population goes through. But the outcome is, the resulting outcome of both regimes is that more than 5 million people have left. And of those 5 million people, 200,000 are here in the United States. They're part of us, and they don't have a legal status to sustain they came here for safe harbor, and they didn't find through our immigration laws or our asylum laws the protections. So they're vulnerable, and we need to respond to that. That's why I've been a strong advocate of temporary protected status for Venezuelans as it pertains to us domestically here in the US. And of course, the United States must continue to lead with Europe and Latin America in creating pressure and incentives for the regime in Venezuela to move into an election that is credible and accepted by everyone in Venezuela, but most importantly, that can be verified as legitimate around the world, which we haven't had for years, a credible, legitimate election. So Maduro is in power without any legitimacy. And in spite of that, he still has control of the military. And it's basically a military regime that is ruling over the poverty and the exclusion of people, and generated a massive refugee crisis across the world.
Wonderful. Yeah, this is wonderful. So we continuing on. We got anonymous person. How can developing countries help to combat climate change with already developed nations? Get us into that last chapter of the book that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and you know, if you look around innovation in developing countries, particularly in countries that are not oil producers, there has been tremendous amount of innovation to try to find a transition to more sustainable energy platforms. And I like to give you an example. The island of Aruba in the Caribbean. Aruba, with the support of the Netherlands, of course, decided that they will use wind and solar as their future and break away from what was happening in the rest of the Caribbean, that although it was a commonality for them, they were all dependent on oil. And Aruba decided they would do the investments to change the grids, to go that route. And they did it. They did it. They brought electric public transportation. They created a complete different platform. So that's an example of how cooperation between countries with the power, the innovation, like the Netherlands and Aruba, to which they're, as you know, interconnected because Aruba is part of that Commonwealth. But they work together in using something that was evident. I mean, if there's something in the Caribbean, it's sun and wind, right? So if we were to look at that model and work throughout the Caribbean and Central America in that proposition over the next 5 to 10 years, and get the United States and other countries in the Paris Agreement involved in that process, in Africa and other places, we could use the innovation, the best practices, the examples that we see in Aruba and many other places like Aruba, and replicate those around the world. Think about what's happening in Europe, in Germany and in the Netherlands, by law, in 2025 and 2030, respectively, according to the law, they will not produce more vehicles that consume fossil fuel. That's an amazing deadline that they put themselves. I mean, think about that. 2025 is around the corner. 2030 is around the corner. They had the courage to do it. We do have the technology. We do have the innovation power. But we need to force ourselves into those new patterns. And I have seen patterns of innovation in developing countries in different places that you couldn't imagine. The amount of entrepreneurship and innovation that is taking place in Central America, in Colombia, in Africa, to deal with issues about energy, about trading their products, using the internet and leveraging on technology to avoid, to reach the markets where the buyers for their products exist, how cooperatives have grown in this environment of technology and social media, whether it is to merchandise their products or to take orders from clients across the planet without having an intermediary that takes a piece of the action. All of that is happening. And I would say that's a significant proposition. And the other trend I would say it's happening in many developing countries and that we see also in developed countries, is the trends toward, I mean, the whole movement of food justice, and the movement of creating a better health environment in our society by changing our eating habits. I mean, has created an amazing return through different processes, an amazing return to organic, sustainable agriculture. And we're seeing progress there. The closer and the more organic our agriculture becomes, the less dependence on these big chains of transportation that demand food products to be moving around or across an extent territory like the United States. So there are incredible trends, both in developing countries and in the developed world, that are significantly changing, slowly changing, and responding to the paradox. But we need more involvement of governments, and we need more people in society to embrace the challenge. There's too many people out there that continue to resist to the proposition that there is climate change, that there is something man can do, that we can do as individuals, changing our habits, changing our ways to respond to that threat that is existential, as I mentioned in the book. And there are numbers you'll find in the book of how deadly climate change has become. There is even now a situation where you're beginning to see a climate change or environmental disaster related migration out of Africa into Europe and other places. So we are years away from a major disaster if we don't start taking action. And there is too many people resistant to the idea that we have to embrace those changes, precisely because there are politicians playing with misinformation about what this is and what needs to be done. And I think we all need to be cognizant as a society that this is no problem to be playing games with. This is as critical as any other national security threat that we have ever confronted as a country.
Very well said, very well said. So we're probably not going to have time for all the questions, but we're going to try to get to as many as we can here. How has censorship impacted Venezuelan life? So you talked about this a little bit, both socially, but also with government.
How could you repeat?
How has censorship impacted Venezuelan life, socially, but also with government?
Well, censorship is incredible in Venezuela. Every major outlet in Venezuela has suffered censorship and persecution. The life of journalists in Venezuela and their freedoms had been under attack consistently. You know, many media outlets, in order to survive and continue, not only read what's happening out there, there is self-censorship in Venezuela. There are editors and media owners and outlets that say there are lines I can't cross, so I'm going to start censoring my own work from within. So at the same time, corruption associated with the regime has been in a position to buy many traditional outlets, force them to sell those outlets. So many traditional outlets had fallen into the hands of friendly proxies of the regime through an absurd amount of money that were transacted for those media outlets. But the owners had no choice. It was sell me this or else, you know? It's my way or the highway. So many people said, okay, I surrender. Here it is. And then you have also the emergence of a significant amount of new media conglomerates with the same kind of money we're talking about. This money that is the result of the opacity of the Venezuelan economy, the corruption of the Venezuelan economy. So that has affected daily lives in ways that you can't predict, because people are not informed. People cannot see what's their alternative. People cannot compare and contrast opinions. Elections cannot be free. It's not a level, it's not a plain level field until you ensure that free speech will come back in a way that allows the political electoral cycles to be competitive. And on the other hand, it's the space of social media. So everything is really happening. The only way people get information in Venezuela or get to know what the dissent to the government thinks is through social media. But we talked about the amount of disinformation and how malign actors also interject in social media. And the government with social media has taken a different path. Instead of censoring, which they can't, they have been smart enough to engage. And they do have a strong engagement, not only directly the influencers of the regime, but also bots, trolls, and they're very close to the Cubans and the Russians. So they have created a significant amount of contradiction, debate, and misinformation in the social media space as well. It's affecting the life of people in everything. Just to give you an example, there are extrajudicial killings happening in Venezuela. Extrajudicial killings. I mean, people who identify in the very poor neighborhoods of Caracas. They identify dissent. They harass them. They try to force them to change their tone, their attitude. If people protested for lack of food or medicine, they go and try to suppress them, oppress them, repress them. And if they don't get what they want, secret squads, unidentified squads come in, sponsored by the government, take away somebody from the household, and that person disappears. And that's documented by the United Nations. It's happening. Yet, not many people know this is happening in Venezuela. It takes the United Nations to make a report and say it's happening. And many in Venezuela don't know that report of the United Nations denounces that situation. So it's incredibly important in the process of restoring democracy in Venezuela for the international community to force that the space for free speech and free press comes back in a way that ensures political competition and the exchange of ideas and visions in the country. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult.
Wonderful. We'll keep going with questions. This is great. So this is a question from Marco Millones Mayer, who's a geography professor here at Mary Washington. So just received this one. When Trump got elected and and kept and perhaps even increased. Okay, I got it. When Trump got elected and kept and perhaps even increased his popularity, I told my friends, you see, the US was never really that modern, just like Latin American countries. Modern in the sense of a modern liberal democracy with relatively strong institutions that had the capacity to fight off the worst impulses of populist caudillismos and demagoguery. Mm-hmm. What lessons, if any, do you think the US can take from the experience of Latin America and other less industrialized countries to rebuild or transform itself toward a more robust democracy? So kind of some big issues.
Well, yeah, and you know what? When I saw Trump emerging, 2016, 2015, even before, I wrote an article saying this is the American caudillo. This is the nightmare we've had in Venezuela and other places around the world. I quickly identified that, and it came to be true. the very process we live in this last election, the impeachment we're going through right now, the evidence, the facts are strong. I mean, the conduct and the events that unfolded after the conduct and the words of the president are similar to those we've seen from Chavez, Maduro, and many others. You can't accept the result of an election that turns against you, and it's my way or there's going to be violence, and that's what we witnessed. So there are several things that the United States needs to think about, because we're still are a beacon of democracy and hope for the world, but the world now is looking at us and saying, wait a minute, what we've learned here is that the American democracy is vulnerable as well. And we have to think about the vulnerabilities, not only the strength of our democracy. There are incredible signals of the institutional strength of the American democracy that precisely came about January 6th and beyond. And we saw, after many obstacles, that transition, a peaceful transition of power. But it was really jeopardized. It was really at risk. And we have to think about institutions that we've cherished for years, the Electoral College. We have to have an honest conversation about that. Is the Electoral College really a way to protect, in the mind of the founding fathers, our federal system? Or is the federal system protected by the Senate itself? And is the Electoral College a reminiscence of some form of elitism that was created in the very beginnings of the Republic, because the founding fathers wanted to prevent, like they say in the papers, a populist, they said. We want to protect the country from a populist that could take on and destroy our experiment. Or we have to protect our country, they thought, from a populist that could be promoted by the British to take control and take America back into British dominance. So that was the fear that led to the Electoral College. Yet we don't talk frankly about that. We have to engage in that conversation, right? We have to engage in a conversation about the how to strengthen our electoral system. How do we prevent voter suppression? The reason why so many people buy the argument without factual ground supporting that there was fraud in this election is because millions of people were franchised, were able to vote this past election because the exceptionalism of the pandemic provided them with expanded voting rights. And many states facilitated vote by mail, facilitated early voting, and that created a massive wave of participants in the process that otherwise would be on the sidelines. So we cannot go back. We have to still make voting easier for people, to make our democracy speak louder and the results more credible. And we can't question the results because more people vote, especially if we're the ones that are not getting the votes. And there's so many other things we can talk about, but our institutions need to go through important revisions, reforms, and adjustments so that we can ensure that the reason why we were able to prevent the decline that was initiated over the past few years in our democratic norms cannot come back. And I finished saying that it's not over. I mean, the job is not done because we overcome those problems. And I think that's why it's very important to establish accountability in this process we're living in right now. Without that accountability, it's going to be difficult to, as a society, come back and say, okay, this needs not to be ever again the case in America.
Wonderful. So we don't have much time left. So like to conclude with a question that's relevant to us in higher ed. What do you think is the most pressing paradox for higher education?
Well, there you go. I mean, higher education, in which I am deeply involved, as you know, I sit on the board of our great university, and I interact with many other higher educations here in the state of Virginia. I was a professor back in my days in Venezuela. I mean, I think technology, distance education, the virtual classroom, innovation needs to come and take more roles and more part in the way we're dealing with education. I think that we have created we are living. We're not. It's not. I'm not blaming anybody, but we have to be aware and recognize that we are in a situation where the cost of education, as it is today, for the students is unbearable, for the great vast majority of students, and for the families of them. And that financial burden also makes less sense when you look at the opportunities in the market, because some people would not be able to pay for their student debt with the salaries they found for the jobs they were educated for in our system. And that has to do with the way we need to reform our educational system on one hand, the role government plays and needs to play there, but also I think we need to reflect on what are we educating people for? The economy is changing. The jobs are in a different place than they were 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Workforce development, adults that need to, at 35, 40, 45 years old, transition. All of that are pressing demands on our higher education system. And I am afraid that we need to invest more. Not only private resources, but most importantly, public resources. If we do not understand that education is our biggest equalizer and the fundamental proposition to sustain through our human capabilities, economic growth, prosperity, and social advancement, if there is something more important than that in a budget, you tell me what it is. I mean, we need to go back to that fundamental proposition of putting our money where our mouth is, and investing in our higher ed and in all levels of education, and be mindful of the transformation of the economy and how it impacts the contents of our educational system, and also be mindful that we can lower some costs by using technology in our educational system as well. I think that we could do that. There are many people who have addressed the issue and proposed ways to do it, and we just have to do it. We just have to begin doing it. And at the end, like I said, people in the national legislature, in the Congress, and in the state legislature, we all need to be mindful of where this priority needs to be situated in terms of the resources we're investing and what it means for our communities.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we're at 5 after 5, so I know we want to kind of keep it more or less till about 5 o'clock. We're left with quite a few fascinating questions that we haven't gotten to, which is a good problem when we have these types of talks. We wish to thank you for your time and your insights and sharing your book with us. So I want to tell everyone again that they've generously offered to send us copies of the book in both English and Spanish. And so the way we're going to handle it is that If you're interested in a copy, so anyone who attended is able to get a copy, and let us know what language you want to read it in. And so if you can email our office manager, Jennifer Bwist, I just put it in the chat there, MDLL@UMW.edu. When they arrive, they'll be available to pick up in Combs Hall, probably between 9 and 4 or something like that. For people that are local here and want to come in, if you're not, we can also arrange to send it to you as well. And Alex wrote, I would love to pay as well to support you. Is that possible? So we could talk about that.
So here it is. I mean, you're gonna have books for the students, first come, first serve.
Yes.
Professors, Marcel and Jeremy will handle that.
Yes.
If anybody is interested in the book, it's in Amazon, outside of the student audience. It's in Amazon, it's easy, both the Spanish and the English version. And also through our website, IQ Latino /94 paradojas, there are ways to get on hold of the book through our own website. But I welcome the opportunity for the students of Mary Washington to be here with me today. Thank you, both of you, Marcel, Jeremy, and the whole staff. I know Jeff McClurkin, our great professor and secretary of our board, could not be here.
Actually, he was here.
Here, he's attended. Yep.
Yeah.
He finally made it.
Yeah, he came later. Yeah, but he was here. Yeah.
Thank you for his efforts to make this happen. And my hope is that with those books you're going to have, students can grab them, take them to their clubs, take them to their corridors, pandemic, social distance permitted, and talk about these issues. And talk about these issues even with those who don't agree with you. Try to listen and try to, isolate opinions from facts. That's an operation that I suggest you all do. Just try to isolate opinions. Before you get to the world of opinions, you can argue with people and say, well, let's try to find common ground through the facts. And once you have the facts, then the discussion about opinions becomes more bearable and more interesting also, because it's where you want to be.
Well, we feel very fortunate that you serve on the Board of Visitors here at Mary Washington. You're very insightful, you're very forward thinking, and we feel honored that you're serving in that capacity and that you were able to join us today for this really interesting and stimulating discussion. I wish we had all been in the same room, but this is where we are these days, so we're on Zoom. But
we'll find a way.
I hope we can do it again in the future.
Yes.
Hope we can do it again in the future at some point. Okay, thank you so much, both of you. Okay, Leopoldo especially. Okay, Jeremy, for your wonderful moderation. Okay, and thanks to everyone who came. We were at peak times, we were 57 people. So, and 57 visitors. So it was quite a good turnout. Thank you everyone for coming, and keep that email address handy. We will inform you once the books are in. Okay.
Thank you very much to everyone, and gracias. And there is my assistant also posted there some ways to find the books if you're not in the Washington community. Thank you very much.
Great, wonderful. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Much. Bye-bye.